From the studios of 850 AM, WFTL in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, this is Outlaw, America's alternative voice. Streaming around the world at outlawshow.com. Tonight, a special roundtable discussion about bullying, sponsored by Nova Southeastern University. Our special guests include Jessica Wilson, Lucas Alvarez, and from Safe Schools South Florida, Robert Lupo. Now, your host for Outlaw, Dean Trantalis.
Welcome back to the second half of our show, Outlaw, America's alternative voice. We talked a little bit about the concept of bullying in general, and I appreciate the comments that we've had from Jesse Wilson from the Gay Straight Alliance at Nova University, and Darren Copercio, who is an assistant director with the administration involved with issues in dorm life, and Robert Lupo, representative from Safe Schools South Florida. Robert, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about what your organization does, but a little bit more specific, if I could. There clearly has been demonstrated a need to teach teachers and administrators about how to react to bullying situations in school. I think in this movie Bullied, one of the salient features that was noticed is the lack of reaction or the lack of response by the principal and by the teachers when it was clearly exhibited to them that this kid was being beaten up, bloodied, cornered in hallways and bathrooms, and it was just a matter of sport to demean this person in that many ways, and yet those who could do something about it didn't. And tell us what Safe Schools South Florida does to try to change that kind of policy here in the schools in South Florida.
Sure. Safe Schools South Florida's mission is, as I said earlier, teaching respect for all in schools, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, real or perceived. With that, one of the things that is so important that we've talked about, as Jesse talked about, is making sure that the educators are aware of the difference that they can make and how important it is for these young people to have somebody to step in and say something when bullying occurs.
Do you expect them to come up with programs on how to engage these situations? That is to say, do you provide lecturers? Do you provide programs yourself as an organization, or do you expect the school to figure out how to go about doing it? Is there any monitoring system? How do you actually get this to be done in these schools?
Right. Well, idealistically, it would be great if the schools themselves, the institutions, had the information, the knowledge, the resources to make all of this happen. What Safe Schools South Florida has been is a catalyst to work, hoping to more and more institutionalize the work that we do. And with that, in the training programs, we found when we first started, many of the educators wanted to help. They wanted to do something, but they just weren't quite sure what they could do. And with the training programs themselves, we provide scenarios, we provide role-playing, we provide best practices, strategies, what teachers can say, what things would help the most right there when the bullying occurs. Things just
so you have a program which educates the school administrators and the teachers on how to deal with the bullying situations.
Exactly.
And do you feel that the schools that you've approached have embraced your offer to participate in this kind of education? More
and more schools are embracing this work. They've understood for many reasons, whether it's because they want to do good or because, just as in the film you were speaking about, Bullied with Jamie Nabosny, they ended up with a lawsuit award of $950,000 against the school district because the school district did not take action that was needed.
Well, certainly, it's not just about money because, as Jesse said earlier, the consequences of being bullied have ramifications that continue in adulthood, and those are psychological issues that no amount of money could ever erase.
Right.
So so obviously we're trying to get involved at the earliest possible level to avoid the possibility of these experiences from having an indelible effect on a person's psyche as they grow up. I mean, I guess we've all kind of experienced some form of bullying in some measure. I remember it happened to me once, I think, in high school, where someone made some half-hearted attempt to try to intimidate me, and it didn't really quite work.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I was meaner looking than he was. I don't know. But and certainly bullying takes place in contexts other than just between gay people and non-gay people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you get involved in that as well?
Yes. The bullying as you said, has such terrible psychological effects. Any kind of bullying, whether it's because of race, ethnicity, appearance, orientation, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, all of these kinds of things we try to bring into and highlight within the workshops that we do, so that as we are looking at creating safer schools for any group of people, we're creating and making sure that we include all groups of people.
Now, you may be aware that in the recent past, the state of Florida was asked to include sexual orientation in a hate crimes bill. I don't know if you know what hate crimes is, where if a person perpetrates an act and it's done for the either the stated or the observed reason that it was due to a person's hate because of the victim's race, their religion, their national origin, their gender, and sexual orientation was asked. The people within our community were asking the state to add sexual orientation to that list in order to ensure that it was a signal to the population that sexual orientation was important enough of a group that law enforcement would not tolerate people being victimized by acts perpetrated against them. This same kind of sexual orientation issue also was brought up in a safe school bill. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that I remember Lawton Childs and the fact that we added sexual orientation within the hate crimes bill within Florida years ago. It was just an outstanding place.
But there was a bullying measure that came up a couple years ago.
Right, and on that, yes. And
that's what I'm talking about.
Exactly, and I just wanted to as you're comparing those two, sexual orientation, of course, needed to be included in that,
but it wasn't.
It wasn't, and the reason is again, it's part of this fear. It's a part of, unfortunately, elected officials. Their number one job is get elected, and the number two job is never forget number one, get elected. It's really important that that we look at what needs to be done, and what needs to be done is making sure that we delineate the categories so that people will know what they are to look for and what they are to protect against. Otherwise, it's just too nebulous.
Well, in that situation, I got a little involved, and Ellen Bogdanoff was a state representative at that time, and she's now a state senator. And she was the person whose committee was in charge of steering that through the legislature. And many of us in the community, both straight and gay, were implored her to add sexual orientation and to add stated categories that needed to be protected, as you just described. And she refused. And she said we should just generalize that people should not be bullied in schools, and that should be enough. And I always wondered whether that was just a total cop-out to the leadership of the Republican Party who is in power at the state house, or did she really feel that by generalizing that was enough to help the student who is going to be a victim of bullying? Tell us what you think about that.
Well, I just think all you have to do is look at the history of our country and look at the history. I grew up in the segregated South. We lived under a constitution which said that everyone was equal, but obviously they weren't. And not until we had specific laws that stated that you must make sure that the civil rights apply to those with regard to race, with regard to color, with regard to creed. You have to list those specific categories. Otherwise, it is a cop-out.
And so, as a result of the law now in place, have you, has there been a study as to the level of activity of bullying? Has Florida now taken control of the problem because it passed that nebulous law, or have the incidence of bullying increased? Tell us a little bit about the experience that you've come to witness in the last couple of years.
I think whenever you present and bring forth an awareness about a situation, and then you have actual categorization, and you collect data on this, you're going to see a spike in some of the incidents, which is only natural. That's a part of what you're doing in collecting the research information. So you will see a spike only because now finally there's been some collected data on that. But what you have to look at is the long term and over a period of time. And with that, and from some of the information that I've seen, there has been a decrease in numbers over the last couple of years. First, there was an increase in a spike, but as people become aware and as policies are instituted and trainings instituted, and people become aware of what they need to do and about the effects of bullying, the bullying does decrease. In those, particularly with LGBTQ youth, in school districts that have those specific categories.
Well, that's a good point you raise, Jesse. I'd like to ask you, with the heightened level of discussion regarding bullying and the fact that social media is certainly an opportunity to discuss this topic, and the younger generation is so in tune with social media ways of expressing itself. Bullying, it seems like it's not cool anymore, and is that social pressure helping to diminish the level of experiences of bullying that are happening, say today as opposed to say 10 years ago?
I definitely think that in regards to the LGBT community, there is some positivity in that for the younger generation, the individuals I speak to in high schools. There is a lot more positivity. There's a lot more of a positive feeling towards gays and lesbians. Not so much towards the transgender community because there's still a lot of ignorance, but towards the gay and lesbian community. The younger generation is starting to feel a little more positive. There's definitely still pressure and negativity, for this conflicting gender display and individuals not meeting up to their expected roles, but things are getting a little better, and for a lot of individuals, they're out in high school in a way that 5 or 10 years ago I wouldn't have been able to be out in high school. So things.
So
are
is that
changing.
helping the bullying problem, or is that in other words, is that making people more a target because they're coming out more, or is that a positive reinforcement because the numbers are increasing and therefore it's not so cool to pick on somebody because there are many more behind that person?
I feel it's both positive and negative. It's positive because, yes, people are more visible. When, that one individual comes out and sees that there's 5 or 10 other individuals maybe in their year who are also self-identifying or thinking they might identify that way, they have support, which is a really incredible experience I don't think any generation before has had the benefit of having. But it's also negative in that because there's more visibility for the individuals who do harbor homophobia, there's a little more discomfort and a little more hatred, and because they can't express it publicly because it wouldn't be cool, they can express it behind the privacy of the veil of social media.
Mm-hmm.
They can tweet, they can make comments without other people present who might say something against them. So there's a lot more hurtful, and what's being said on social media is so vicious that it seems to
give
get
us an
worse.
example.
I don't have a specific example offhand.
Is this just like saying nasty things on their by texting nasty things on their phones, on their iPhones?
Even to contributing posts on Facebook. I think what some of the social media aspect does is takes away some of that responsibility, or that young man that tried to bully you in high school had to physically interact with you in person to get some kind of a response from you or not get a response from you. And when you do it via social media, you don't have that other person reacting. You're just able to post away and vent and bully and not have an immediate reaction. So in some ways, it's gotten more pointed and more hateful than maybe it has in the past.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I had been running for office in years ago, the concept of blogging was just getting started, and people would vent their feelings by blogging on certain websites like the Sun Sentinel political website and so forth. And some of the most unbelievable things were said that I don't even know where they came up with some of these things. Finally, I stupidly went to a blog and read some comments during one of my campaigns, and that was the last time I ever went to a blog, because I just could not believe some of the things people say. Now, you got to sort of take sometimes, life with a grain of salt, and are we witnessing like an extra sensitivity here that perhaps, maybe they are victims, but maybe they don't have to be if they just kind of pull themselves up by their own bootstraps? What do you think about that, Darren?
Well, regardless of what the response is, it's definitely hurtful, it's definitely hateful. And I mean, how do you not react in a way where that affects who you are as a person? I mean, something being posted on your Facebook page, Twitter, blog, whatever, and then reading that, and if you're obviously in an emotional state that you're susceptible to that, I mean, it's going to start to define who you are, or it has that possibility.
Well, and it may also lead to really antisocial behavior.
Of
In
course.
fact, and also we've seen suicides result as from that type of conduct, where people are so mortified by what's being said about them, they can't even walk out their front door because they're still young and impressionable. Is that kind of what we're talking about here then?
Yeah, I think it is. One of the, you gave a couple of examples about being out and being an ally, and sort of having high school students and even college students seeing folks that are out and that are straight allies. That's significant, because if students are walking around on a high school campus or a college campus and not recognizing that there's anybody there to support them, whether they be out adults that are functioning in an administrative role or in a role in society that is positive, and for straight people in the same roles that are allies and are communicating that, those individuals are going to feel completely lost. And I mean, that's one of the main reasons why myself as a gay administrator, but also other colleagues of mine within the campus community, are out and visible and vocal about it, because our undergraduate students, even our grad students, or anyone, really needs that connection and that support just visibly.
Do you think that Nova Southeastern provides an enhanced opportunity for people who are still dealing with their sexual orientation, and who might in fact feel a little uncomfortable stepping out into the real world, both physically and psychologically? Does Nova tell us a little bit more about how Nova accommodates these situations?
Sure. I think the biggest piece is that we have a zero tolerance policy for any kind of physical violence, whether it be bullying or whatnot. As long as it's physical, we have a zero tolerance policy. When it comes to hate crimes and vocalizations of negative statements, whether it be written, text, social media, we address it very strongly. I think because Nova is in South Florida, you're in between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, I think there's a larger community around Nova itself that has a lot of resources. I think the institution itself has a culture where these incidents are addressed and there is support there. But I think the piece when it comes to support is that the students that know where to go will definitely get the support much more readily available than those students that don't. And I think that's one of the things maybe the institution needs to work on, is sharing as much information as they can so that those avenues are much more visible. But I can tell you, at least in my experience, when something is brought to the attention of an administrator that I work with or I have access to, everything that I've known about has been dealt with in as an expeditious way as possible. I think when we look at the instances of suicide that happened in the Northeast and in other parts of the country, you can't take the chance of saying, well, it's not a big deal, it's just, students being students. You can't say that, because that one instance could be one of 50, could be, one of 100 that are going to lead to a student making a permanent choice for an impermanent problem.
A few years back, there was a story about a young girl who sued her school. It was a private school in Connecticut. It's called Miss Porter's School, and very, very blue blood kind of old world tradition that was followed there. And it was started in the 19th century, and this young girl sued the school because she felt that she was being bullied, not necessarily in a physical sense, but much like what Jesse talked about in the sort of shunning process and just feeling like she was not made to, she wasn't measuring up. And her argument was that that the environment created it made her feel diminished as a human being, and she didn't think the school in any way was participating in making a change to that. And the school fought back and said, the founder of Miss Porter's School said, when you confront adversity like this, you need to tough it out, and that's what New England girls should be doing. And when I saw this story, I thought to myself, boy, has society changed? Have we become more sensitive as human beings that we need administrators to help us out, or has society become a little bit less interested in caring for the next person? And I don't think there's an answer to that, but I do think that as a society, we have a lot of opportunity here to work with one another and create positive change, rather than attacking one another, thinking we're going to advance by stepping on somebody and leaving them in the dust. And I imagine that as a student, Jesse, at school, you probably see many elements of competition and where sensitivity to one another's needs or who they are as individuals come up in subtle ways. And you explained as a woman that the subtlety is ever more present than amongst males, and that's an aspect of bullying we don't hear an awful lot about. But tell us about how women deal with that, because clearly we've heard a lot about how the men deal with it, and tell us how women deal with this sense of being bullied by other women.
I think it's a little more difficult because it's a lot harder to go to an administrator or to someone in a position that could help and say, well, these girls aren't talking to me. From a personal experience, when I was doing my undergrad, I lived in the dorms, and girls, once they discovered my sexual orientation, made a point of leaving. We had a shared shower. Leaving the shower when I went in as if I was going to, ogle them or rape them, I don't know. But they made a point of kind of shunning me and not wanting to be in that area. When I was there, no one ever vocally said anything. No one ever harmed me in any way, physically did anything to me. And so it wasn't something I could go and say, hey, this is going on. But it was very hurtful to me. So it's difficult because there isn't really a way to address those sorts of more subtle aspects. Things luckily being said over Facebook, texting, things like that, are now starting to be addressed. And that is also, I think, a way that women have had to deal with these sorts of things and these kind of catty, hurtful comments that get made. Institutions such as Safe Schools South Florida and other anti-bullying organizations have really stepped up their game in the past few years in making that a part of the training. So at least that aspect is now being addressed.
All right, well, that's good to hear, and we certainly have talked a lot about the subject, and there's so much more to ask about what is going on in bullying and in schools. And I want to thank all of you here tonight for coming and speaking about it, each from your own perspective. And Robert Lupo, thank you for being part of this tonight. And,
Sure, thank you.
And Jesse Wilson, thank you. And Darren Carpercio, did I get that right this
Yes,
time?
you did.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. From Nova Southeastern. I really appreciate all that you've had to contribute tonight, and certainly I hope the listeners have learned more and have educated themselves about this subject and what we can do to try to eradicate the problem that now exists. I'd like to tell our listeners that next week at this time we're going to have a show about women in politics, the lesbian women who hold public office here in Broward County. We have three: Julie Carson, Lee Pierman, and Sherry McCartney, all in Broward County. So we look forward to hearing and being part of the show with you next week, 9 o'clock.